world as they share innovative teaching pedagogies that take advantage of technology. We are no longer limited by physical barriers. A moot court competition with students from Russia and Kenya and the United States coming together for a competition in Germany is not wishful thinking or a pie in the sky idea, but it was a reality during this academic year. How exciting. I look forward to hearing all of the presentations today. Many, many thanks to Professor Fountaine and the student members of the SIU School of Law Journal for putting together this amazing symposium today. Again, welcome everybody.
Thank you very much, Dean Davidson, for that nice welcome. I want to reiterate your thanks to everyone who's participating and welcome everyone here. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a great lineup of speakers, and I can't wait. I joined Dean Davidson saying I can't wait to hear everybody's presentation. I also want to take a moment to introduce my co-planners, Professor Chris Behan. If you're in the house, please turn on your camera, and Law Journal Administrative Editor Hannah Westmoreland. Hannah. We really worked as a team to put this program together and are very excited about the way it turned out. So I want to thank my co-planners and also introduce them to you at this time. You'll see more of them later in the program. As we move through the day, Professor Behan and I are going to take turns moderating the discussion portions of the program. I also want to give a shout out and thanks to Barb Smith, who did a great job on our materials, our flyer, and our website. So thank you to Barb for all your hard work also. If you missed the slide that I had up just before we started, I just want to let you know that the agenda for today's program is available on the website. We obviously couldn't give you handouts here, so we posted the agenda along with the bios and abstracts for each of the presentations on our website. If you didn't catch that link, I will post it again in the comments as soon as I am finished speaking. You can also go to law.siu.edu, and there is a link there to get to it as well. Also, I want to remind everybody, please go ahead and keep your cameras off and your mics muted while we're talking. We're trying to reduce the drain on everyone's internet. We have found, especially since we are being joined by people from all across the globe, that it's sometimes hard to maintain internet connections. In fact, my own internet has been acting freakish for the last 2 days. So if you suddenly lose me, I'll come back, I promise. Just carry on without me. I'm going to launch my slides now, and while I'm launching my slides, I will turn off my camera to save on bandwidth. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to launch my slides and talk a little bit about the moot court collaboration that Dean Davidson mentioned a moment ago. As the saying goes, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has really handed a lot of lemons to people all over the world. As we know, it's had a huge and horrible impact across the globe, with over 2.8 million deaths so far from the disease. It's also had a profound impact on education worldwide, including legal education. We've had to all adapt our teaching methods and materials to enable students to continue learning and to create meaningful opportunities for students to do so. International legal education could easily have been a casualty of COVID-19. International travel stopped, And since most of us have been deeply immersed in the abrupt pivot to virtual learning, there has been little time to do much else other than just keep up with our daily responsibilities. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. It feels like every day lasts about 2 years, but then the days collectively are going really fast. As this symposium demonstrates, we did in fact make lemonade from those lemons. Instead of throwing up our hands and conceding defeat, we've harnessed technology built on collaborations and created new international learning opportunities for our students. This year, I had the big idea to prepare an international team to compete in the Nuremberg Moot Court competition. The Nuremberg competition is usually held annually in courtroom 600 in Nuremberg, Germany, where the Nuremberg trials were held. The competition involves a fictitious case in a pretrial stage before a mock international criminal court patterned after the ICC in The Hague. I'd been wanting to take a team to this competition for several years because I teach a class focused on the Nuremberg trials and the ICC, which includes an international travel component where we visit the Nuremberg court as well as the International Court in The Hague. So I solicited the help of my colleague, Chris Behan, who you met a moment ago, and together we have coached this collaborative team that brings together students from Russia, Kenya, and the United States to virtually compete in the Nuremberg competition. This experience for the students, and it's also been professionally rewarding for faculty at all 3 schools who have worked hard to make this possible. This collaboration is the product of a longer-term collaboration between myself and Udmurt State University in Ijevsk, Russia, and between my colleague, Chris Behan, and the University of Nairobi. I've been arranging weekly video conference lectures for Udmurt State law students since about 2013. So without these already solid relationships, I don't think we would have been able to pull this off. So meet the Wonder Women. This team includes 5 women from 4 campuses on 3 continents: Udmurt State in Russia, the University of Nairobi Parkland, and the University of Nairobi Mombasa in Kenya, and Southern Illinois University here in the United States. The team itself chose the name Wonder Women, and they have indeed been Wonder Women. The students were selected by their own schools to participate. We've had 2 primary goals in this program. One is to enhance global awareness, cultural understanding, and international collaboration and cooperation. Our team has really exemplified this goal, collaboration and cooperation in particular. They have really come together to bond and form a team. And then second, to provide an exceptional educational experience resulting in legal knowledge and skills acquisition. We wanted to do something unique that would give these students a really interesting experience and also make it a learning experience for them. So why the Nuremberg court competition? I already told you that I had been interested in this competition for a long time due to my the course I teach, but also we felt that this competition had a great historical significance, particularly for our collaboration. The team we formed to participate in this competition represents the unprecedented collaboration that resulted in the Nuremberg trials themselves, which, as you know, was a collaborative tribunal of allied forces, which included both the United States and the former Soviet Union. In addition, as we all know, African countries have been most affected by the ICC in their prosecutions so far in the time that the ICC has been operating. And so this seemed like an ideal collaboration for this competition, we felt. Also, this competition was within our expertise. As I mentioned, I teach a class. I've also led groups of students to visit Nuremberg many times. Of course, that would prove to not be so relevant this time since there's not going to be any travel. But it felt like it was within our expertise. Also, my colleague Chris Behan is an international criminal law expert, and he's the director of the mock trial team here at SIU. So his experience and expertise were critical to this program's success also. So we knew this program would be manageable for us and would enable us to do this collaboration. What was the impact of COVID-19? The main impact of COVID-19 has been that we can't travel now, so we won't be able to visit Germany and do the oral arguments. The oral arguments will all be online. However, I question whether we would have ever done this had it not been for COVID-19. We certainly could have done it, but I don't know if it would have occurred to us to do this collaboration before COVID-19. So I really feel like it grew out of the roadblocks that the pandemic threw our way. This gave us an opportunity to participate at really no cost because there's no travel cost. The courage to be able to try this since we knew everyone would be competing virtually also. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenges and also the positive outcomes. We've had a couple of challenges, but nothing huge. By far, our biggest challenge has been the difference in time zones and trying to find meeting times for all of our team members when they could meet with their busy schedules and in light of the really large time difference between the United States and Kenya and Russia. Also, another challenge was that 2 of our team members had English as a second language. I mention this as a challenge because I think it must have been challenging for them. However, we didn't even notice it. They were so fluent in English and they participated as equally with the native English speakers. So they really did a terrific job overcoming that barrier if it was one. Another challenge was developing team camaraderie. When you have members of a team that are located on 3 different continents, it is a challenge to help them form a bond that makes them a team. But we really wanted this to be a team, not just separate students working on separate parts of a project. In part, this was because of the part of our mission, cultural understanding, but also because I think students have a much better academic experience and learn from each other by learning together. So we really wanted to create a team spirit, and I think we were really successful in doing this. We did it in part by having very frequent Zoom meetings. We met frequently by Zoom, and we also encouraged the team members to meet on their own through Zoom. We had a WhatsApp discussion group, and we communicated very frequently, almost daily throughout this process. In addition, we made each team member responsible for a particular part of the brief, but then also responsible for the entirety. Everyone was responsible for the entire memorandum as well as their own part. And that really engaged them and gave them a stake in the whole. And I think that contributed to creating a nice team environment. So here's the real Wonder Women, and I'm going to talk about the impact and using their own words. We have on the screen quotes from each of the team members, and they all, to a person, had a great experience. For all but one of these students, it was their first international competition. And for all of them, it was the first time they ever competed on an international team like this with students from different countries. All expressed that it was one of the best experiences they'd had in law school. All felt like they were part of a greater whole and that their contributions were valued and that they valued the contributions of the other students as well. There was a real sense of camaraderie and mutual respect among the entire team. And I just want to read one of these comments to you. This experience was beyond my wildest dreams. People from different cultures, jurisdictions, and not forgetting the toughest different time zones, all together drafting. The team has been nothing short of its name, Wonder Women. And I think my co-coach and I would agree that really sums up our experience with this team. We have been so impressed with their hard work. They have made their deadlines and completed their assigned tasks. I think they all lost some sleep due to the time zone differences, especially at the end when they were polishing their citations and making their headings all uniform and that sort of thing. But they really did a great job coming together and completing the written portion of the competition. Now we are in a holding pattern, waiting to see if we've been selected to participate in the oral portion of the competition, when we'll find out very soon whether or not we will be able to advance to the oral argument phase of the competition. So real quickly, some of my takeaways from working with this group. First and foremost, do the work you're passionate about and involve students in that work. Whenever I've done projects that I involve students in, it's much more rewarding for me, and it's extremely rewarding for the students as well to be able to work with you on projects like this. Second, draw on the relationships you have to create new opportunities and collaborations. This would have been much more difficult if we didn't already have solid relationships with these universities. There would have been no one at the other end of the Zoom call, so to speak. So it's really important, I think, to maintain the relationships you have and then think creatively about how you can draw on those relationships to expand new opportunities. Third, view the pandemic as a springboard rather than a roadblock. Think about possibilities rather than impossibilities. I think it would have been easy for all of us to simply say, "Oh my gosh, this pandemic is going to crush us," but we didn't. And the fact that we're able to have this symposium and all talk about all the really cool things that we're doing at our own schools is a testament to that, and that we can overcome hardships and really view it as an opportunity rather than an impediment. So don't stop making lemonade when the universe pummels you with lemons. That's the final closing thought that I'll leave you with this morning. Now, let me see if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen. There we go. And I'll come back to you. We are going to move from speaker to speaker today without discussion, and we'll have a discussion section about every 3 or 4 speakers. If you look at the schedule, it'll tell you the time, and we'll do some discussion and a break around every hour or so. So without further ado, I am going to turn things over to my next speaker, Dan Davies. I've enjoyed working with Dan at the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Professionalism for several years, not quite 7, I don't think.
No.
Dan is an expert in online course creation, and I'm really excited to hear what he has to say for.
Hello, Cindy. Hello,
This
everyone.
morning.
Thank you very much indeed. So before I start sharing my screen, I just want to very quickly say thank you for the time. The goal of this next 30 minutes is I'm going to throw you into a series of activities. Make sure you have a Word document up or a piece of paper and a pen or something to just write some ideas down. You don't have to share anything that you don't want to. What hopefully you're going to get from this is maybe 1 or 2 things will trigger to think, oh, I might try that in my class, or that's another way of thinking about it. The chances are that a lot of the things I'm talking about, you've already done in your class, whether consciously or unconsciously. but I'm just going to present 5 or 6 different strategies I use or things I think about when I'm creating a course. So I'm going to also come off video because I'm a lot prettier on my profile photo than I am in real life. And I will share and get started shortly. Give me 1 second. Okay. Right. Could someone confirm that you could see my slide deck, please?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing really I want to talk about, and what I'm also doing is that I'm using some of the structure I use for classes in this class, so to speak. So I usually start with expectations and not just housekeeping, like turn off your phones and things like that, although that is important. I usually set people up. I like to think about it, getting your head in the game, okay? Because learners learn a lot better when they have some metacognition around this is what's expected of me, and this, oh dear, something's clicking. I do apologize. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. There must be some timers on for something. I apologize about that. Come out here. Don't use timings, right? All right, try again. Apologize, everyone.
Hey, stuff happens. If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't have had this year.
Yeah, exactly. So like for today, for example, essentially there's an introduction, and then we're going to do 6 4-minute chunks. I'm sure you're all aware about chunking information. People find it easier to process in order to put into their working memory and then repeat and eventually put into long-term memory. Now, what each chunk will essentially, we'll talk briefly about a concept. I'm going to ask you to brainstorm, and then I'm going to offer an opportunity for you to report out some of the things you thought about. And we're going to do that a number of times over different contexts. Okay. So, get going. Okay. We're going to start off with a quick activity. But first, I just want to say one thing I like to do that seems to go well is if I'm changing the focus, I change the format. So right now, as you can see, there's purple at the top. There's sort of very much a purple and white theme. If I change the format of the slide, it's because now the focus is on you. So you are doing an activity. So activity slides, you'll notice, are blue. All right, this can be done a number of different ways, not just through PowerPoint, but it's often good. And it's around sort of doorway theory, think about the way that we think. If you change something up, then usually there's a reset so you can get people to focus on something slightly different. So it's a good best practice and just a very simple change to make. So for this activity, grab something to write on and take 30 seconds to write down everything you do online. Just anything you do. You don't have to share everything, so just put everything down. And then take 30 seconds to just tick off a couple of things that you think could be used to transfer knowledge and develop skills. So for example, I use Facebook. I've not really considered it something that could transfer knowledge and develop skills, but I've actually developed a soccer group around it and I share through that. So that is one example of something that isn't necessarily traditional learning forum, but could be. So I'm going to give you about a minute. So just write down, and I'm going to ask a couple of people to share at the end. Off we go. So I'll give you another 10 seconds or so. Okay then, so I'd like to invite somebody to share what a couple of things you put down and identified that maybe you haven't used, but surprised you that you thought about, that you could use in one of your classes. Well, this is one. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
I said I'll break the ice. I created a class website this semester. I also do use Facebook and use that for sort of communicating on current events and things like that. Not everyone in my class is on Facebook, so I don't
Mhm.
use it to convey, actual mandatory information in the class, but I do have a class website that I created that includes just about everything the students would need for the class. I think you can do something like that with Canvas also, but we don't have that at my school.
Mhm.
So that's one thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, that's okay. We're going to keep digging into activities. My goal for today is to get someone else to speak. That would be awesome. So another example, another thing people have started using in a previous role, we used Twitter. So we used sort of essentially a Twitter university style, and people could tweet us, the organization, when they were having issues, and then we would give very quick responses. Now, it was an organization that was also involved with higher education, so we couldn't give answers to great papers or anything. But quite often we would give advice about how to maybe tackle a problem on Twitter. And then that way, not only did that student, but of course, everyone else following also got the benefit of it. So it's another possible option. So let's talk briefly about online learning, okay? There are essentially, they typically fall into three methods. So you have your e-learning, which is usually expensive, asynchronous. It would be something that maybe departments would use and is good for evergreen content and content that doesn't typically require a lot of reflection in an in-person setting. All right. An example of this would be whether it's onboarding, student success, introductions, that type of thing, things that typically don't change. Online video is, we've seen a huge jump in online video right now. Obviously very easy to do. It's typically free. People have got very used to sort of, let's say, less than professional settings and what have you, and sort of we've become a lot more relaxed about how people look on video. It is a lecture and there is limited interactivity with it, but it's often a great way to sort of start blending your classes if you don't already do that. And finally, the one that we're going to be talking about today is live webinar, which is what we have here. Okay, so in other words, it's a live class, and it's a little bit more effort typically than an online video if it's done well, but not so much as an e-learning. Right, so I would strongly recommend that if you are more interested in sort of instructional design and developing in, just Google it. There are so many resources, and I'm not going to kind of go through the basics of instructional design here today because, number one, I don't know the audience, so I don't know where they're at, so I could miss the target completely. And also, it's incredibly easy to access. And as much as possible, I try not to sort of waste everyone's time with content that can be accessed in multiple different ways. So what I'm sharing is the sort of the strategies I use, and we're going to talk a bit about why I use them. So it's a little bit of a higher level in terms of cognition as opposed to just some basic knowledge transfer. So first thing I do is I think about the problem and how you know the course is successful. And obviously in an academic setting, the course is successful if all your students get A's, etc., which obviously typically doesn't happen, and I think would be a concern if it did. But starting with the problem is probably the thing I want to focus on most. When you're talking, certainly in an academic setting, but with adult learners in general, not knowing something actually typically isn't the problem, especially these days. Access to information is ubiquitous. It can be done right there and then on your phone. Obviously, you have different opinions of things, but typically, I did not know that existed. It's not usually an excuse for a particular behavior or an outcome that you're looking for. So often I try and look for, well, what's the underlying problem here? Is it a lack of, is there a belief system that doesn't align with what we're asking people to do? Or are there lack of resources in order to be able to actually understand what the problem is? What have you? So typically I try and start with the problem and tackle that. And usually that leads you to a more sort of scenario-based or experiential planning session. I try as much as possible to understand the learners. Now, this doesn't mean, know the mother's maiden name of all your students. What it means is that in a typical group or audience, where are your learners, right? What sort of types there are? And we're going to do a little bit about personas later to understand a bit more about that, all right? But getting, basic understanding is really important. Let the problem drive the structure, and we'll talk again a little bit what that means. Include practice activities every 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to introduce you to a rule that I made up that that I wrote about that seems to be working in at least in the training field that I'm working in. Use ambiguity in scenarios. Again, we'll take a quick look and we'll get you to build a scenario out, and use a job aid with key points and 2 or 3 takeaways. I kept this word job aid, even though this originally was developed for sort of continuing legal education. I say job aid because I think it's important to remember that when you're talking about professional education, whether it's within law school or behind or past that, the whole purpose of it is because people are working in a role that they need to solve problems every day. And so having the mentality is this is going to help you when you finally reach your goal, when you finally get this, will give people a sense of connection to the content that maybe just saying, okay, here are the lesson notes, or here are the key points of the lesson, by connecting it to something tangible which they will gain from. Okay. So starting with the problem and how you know the course is. So typically I ask, what is the problem I'm trying to solve here? Is it just a lack of knowledge? And can I just say, read this chapter and do I solve the problem? And then everyone goes home early. But the secondary question is, well, why is it happening? Why do they not know this? Is it simply a case of lack of, I didn't know I had to know it? Fantastic. What does that mean for your planning though? What changes should people make? So is it just, you should now know this, or does this change how you behave or you interpret additional situations? All right. Will this course help the learners achieve those changes? What that means is, what I want to see in the learners, the things I want to see in is this course addressing those directly? And it seems an obvious question, but so many courses are developed around content. And then at the end of it, you haven't actually addressed the underlying issues that lead to the changes. So if someone isn't thinking critically enough, for example, so we say, right, we're going to give them a ton of ethics cases to try and work through, but the question wasn't asked, why weren't they thinking critically before? All right. And the final question is the most important one. How can we find out if this is actually successful? What can we do? Is it grades, or is it smile sheets, which can tell you whether they enjoyed the class or not? Or are there certain other outcomes that you can look for to say, yes, this, not only did they understand the knowledge that I tested them on, but they also can demonstrate these behaviors. Okay, so starting with the problem and how you know the course is successful. Very quickly, and this one is important because we're going to work with this problem. So think about a course you teach or think about teaching, and write down one problem that it's addressing. So not necessarily they need to know this fact, as opposed to what's something that they don't do before that I'm hoping they're able to do and they should be able to do at the end. And then write down why you think that's happening, and then the change and how you can find out if they make that change. Okay, so I'm going to give you another minute, and I'm conscious about time, so we may have to skip something, but I'll give you a minute to do about this because this will inform our next steps. Off we go. Okay, so I'll give you 10 more seconds. Okay, if I could invite someone to share what they wrote down as the problem that they're trying to address with one of their courses. And there could be a number of problems you're trying to address or issues you're trying to address. But if you could list one, that'd be great.
I'll play, Dan.
Thanks,
so,
Chris.
one of the classes I teach here at the law school is evidence. And one of the things that I've noticed that students struggle to do is to synthesize and use previously studied rules with the current topics that we're studying. So for instance, if we're studying hearsay, they might forget about relevance, which we studied several weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't exactly know why the problem is happening. I think some students don't review periodically. They just, study one thing and then move on to the next. And I also think there's a little bit of tunnel vision that can happen when you're trying to learn a new concept. It's difficult to remember all the other ones that you learned leading up to it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I want them to do when we talk about rules of evidence and go through problems is to remember the rules that we covered before. And to integrate them into our discussions. And we actually have several problems that I use in the class that are designed to do that. Mm-hmm. And for me, one of the ways I can find out if they make that change is by the use of live exercises in the classroom, where they either recognize the additional issues or they don't, but then we stop and talk about those and try to point out the things that came before that mm-hmm. might have been integrated into the current topic if they had been thinking about it.
That's great. And Chris, thank you so much for jumping in as the volunteer. I appreciate that. I really do. So I loved how you said one of the things I can do to find out is by jumping into directly to address the issue you highlight. In other words, not only do you understand the current, but then reflecting back, what you're doing is identifying directly, okay, I recognize this issue. Let's start making this. And by continuing that process, you're going to start getting the learners to realize, oh, his expectation of us is to reflect back and then apply here. So by continuing to do that, and I commend you for doing it. Like I said, most of you are already doing most of the stuff I'm talking about, so it's great to see. Okay, so understand the learners. So then, this one here might be tough for you guys, but it may be worth, not because you're not capable, but in terms of just time. It may be worth just trying a little test group or something. So one of the things you can do is to take a small section of a course and identify some of the learners and some of their characteristics, particularly a section of the course that students typically have issues with. Maybe there's one you're like, oh, this class, they always struggle with this class. Well, that would be a great one to start with. Have a look at some of the characteristics of learners, and then to just to survey them. Just think, okay, why is this an issue? Why are you having an issue with this? What are some of the barriers to your understanding of this particular thing? And see if they line up to your assumptions about why the students are struggling. Because quite often there is a disconnect there. What you think they're struggling with may not actually be the case. And finally, it's often good to just test a little section of the course. So just take a little bit and say, I'm going to try this a little bit differently. Maybe I start with an anecdote here and then talk about the way that it should be approached. Maybe I give them an open-ended problem and see how they come to me with it, and then I add information in and see if they can reflect on their own. So just sort of flipping it, even just testing a section can often help you understand, okay, maybe these little tweaks in my class can really help people understand better, okay? But I understand academic setting, you've got a lot of courses, you've got a lot of students, it can sometimes be difficult to do. So then, I'd like to introduce personas very, very quickly. We're going to actually do something very quickly on this one. A persona is not a student that you know, okay? A persona is a sort of a collection of traits that you see common. And often there's, different people like Myers-Briggs, and there's different personality things, but essentially, they are like a brain trust for you. So I have 3 personas here that I sort of just created for this course. All right. And then what I do is I ask and say, okay, Robert, he's, extrovert. He writes everything down. He's very cautious, kind of conservative into sort of new concepts. If I just say, hey, we have this brand new way of doing something, how's he going to react to that? Now, can I talk for 2 minutes and he's going to take it on? Probably not. Okay, if I'm looking at Carol, for example, all right, she may need to reflect on something for a while, so maybe I just give it as a sort of a pre-work almost for her to reflect on it. Maria Alicia, for example, she's detail-oriented, she's an introvert, she's probably not going to want to answer in class, if at all, but she may understand an awful lot. She's also very tech-savvy, so maybe there's ways that I can use the web or use online tools in her to sort of explore things. So that's personas. This isn't, again, something you don't need to know who their partner is or where they live or what have you. It's more about creating some different types of students and asking them as you're developing courses, how will you react to this? How will you react to this? Because it's much easier when we put ourselves in other people's place. So, personas, let's test it. Get yourself a piece of paper, 3 stick figures, write some names, and add the kind of legal passion. So, you know, with all your students, they obviously have particular things they're leaning towards. Add a couple of characteristics, and then ask these questions. For your problem, for example, Chris's problem, ask the 3 people, what is the problem for you? Why are you not doing this? What do you need to know about it? What do you need in order to be able to start doing the thing I want you to do? And what resources can you develop? And it may well be that these personas sort of give you the answers that you're looking for by just asking. So I'm going to give you another minute to just very quickly try this and then ask someone to comment to see whether it was working or it's something that's not, because it doesn't work for everyone. Let's go. While you're doing that, Cindy, we are very short time. I know I started a little late and I had that tech issue. So what flexibility is there to sort of go over, or do you want me to cut some slides? I can jump to sort of towards the end.
You can do whichever you want. You can take a couple of extra minutes because we did get a late start. So
Okay.
yeah, you can take a couple of extra minutes if you want. We can make it up at the break.
Okay, all right. I'll try not to take everyone's too much time. Okay, so everybody, I'd like to invite someone now. Did anyone try this out? Find that they discovered something that maybe they hadn't thought about before? That's okay. I understand that sometimes it's difficult to try these things live and then comment. I will say, I will encourage you to try this. It may be a bit rushed today, but it is a very powerful design tool. It's something that's very common across course design, across product design, and it is something that can get you to step out. So I encourage you to try this, even if today it didn't necessarily resonate with you. Right, let's move on. Let the problem drive the structure. we're not going to do this activity, but I'm going to quickly just run through what this means. So the issue you're trying to solve will and should drive the structure of the class. So for example, if the concepts are new, there is a certain amount of knowledge transfer needed before people can even currently think about things. So for example, on that case, on the left, you introduce what the current thinking is, if there's been any changes, if the concept is new, not only new to them, but maybe new in terms of it used to be a different way. What's the reason for that change, and adding the new information in, giving some examples of this and practice, and then possible questions. So sort of more of a traditional approach in many regards, but it is important because quite often learners are kind of stuck thinking, well, I really don't know what to think on this one because I have no. If the concepts are sort of evergreen, if these are ones that students have been introduced to before, whether it's formally in a class or whether it's something that's just so common that they should have some awareness of it, again, that's where you want to bring students in. As much as possible, you want to bring adult learners in. And the first one, the concepts of you, is a little more difficult to do. But the second one, if these concepts are evergreen and they're sort of ongoing, you can start bringing in their experience. You can introduce sort of simple materials to help them navigate it, where you can talk through scenarios and discussions of how would you apply, what would be the case in this, and then just sort of reviewing the concept at the end to reflect and reinforce. I suspect most of you already use this method for sort of more traditional things, but again, it's also important to recognize when it is powerful, when not. Finally, if the concepts are a little unclear or kind of challenging, there's some ambiguity there, and there aren't really any black and white answers. All right, then usually lead with a story, lead with an anecdote, lead with something that sets the tone and the need for this concept to even exist. All right, ask them how to reflect so they can pull out their own sort of reactions to that, and then introduce the strategies to say, okay, so here are some of the ways that you can change your thinking, your behavior around this, or how you would apply your understanding to this. Practice scenarios are always important in this particular way, and then reflecting on the practice, not the concept, is key here. So not just, do you think this is correct, as opposed to how would you have gone through that scenario differently? What would you change on this? Why would you change? Okay, so it's about getting people in, because when it's unclear and challenging, you need students to have the freedom and permission to develop their own approaches to issues that aren't black and white. So we're going to skip through this activity and move on to include practice activities every 5 to 10 minutes. People just, they don't like this, but then they try it and they do like it. I call it the Dan's 10-5 rule. And essentially it is, you can talk for 10 minutes maximum before 5 minutes minimum of audience participation. This particular session, we're kind of cranking through it pretty quickly, but really what it is a series of chunked concepts within a class or a series of classes. And when you're developing the class, you've got to say, okay, at 10 minutes, I'm done. So somehow I have to get this concept across in 10 minutes, or I have to break it up into a series of smaller chunks with every 10 minutes, at least 5 minutes, the audience is doing something, whether it's reflecting, an activity, group work, what have you. All right. Okay, so again, I think I'm going to skip this activity because we are a little bit short on time. Okay, scenarios. God bless them. We all use them at some point, whether formally or informally. But let's take the scenario on the left. All right, what we see more or not, often than not, is someone is incivil to you, someone's rude to you, gives you negative feedback in a very rude way or something. So the scenario is, okay, do you punch them? B, do you never talk to them again? Or C, do you listen to their point of view? So I'm guessing most of you would choose C, but I'm guessing you don't need a course to learn that, right? So in scenarios, ideally, every answer is correct. So do you A, discuss it with them? B, do you listen to their point of view? C, do you try and break down and understand where they're coming from? Every single one of those answers is correct. They just have slightly different outcomes and approaches. So in your scenarios, try and use all correct answers just with different outcomes, and then talk about best fit, or talk about what works for you. What is your skill set, for example? All right. And then finally, ask what are the outcomes of doing that. So if you say, all right, everyone chose, or 30% of people chose A, say, why did you choose A? And they'll give you the reason why. But Cindy, you're telling me that.
I'm telling you, time is about up. Please.
Okay. All right. Okay. I will scratch it through. So essentially, then just ask them why they think that, but then say, okay, fine. What are the outcomes once you've done that? What's going to happen next? Give people a chance to really reflect. I will just say, Google branching scenarios. They're fantastic, very easy to build. And if you have a course that goes from year to year, they're a great way to give people something to sort of reflect on. Finally, and this is kind of, I usually try and develop a one-pager with 2 or 3 takeaways. Obviously, keep it very light, keep it simple. I'm going to jump to the final slide. And And this final slide, I will say, I usually try and assume that no one is listening to anything I'm saying apart from the final slide. So in other words, nothing else counts. What do I want them to take away? And that's what I typically do. So I reflect on the final slide. So I identify the problem, try and learn a bit about students, give them a chance to practice, test, and challenge, and don't expect miracles. That essentially is what I've been trying to talk about today, and that's what I would reinforce. All right. So I'm sorry I had to skip through the final parts. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'd like to thank you for your time. I apologize. Thank you so much, Chris, for jumping in as a volunteer. I hope that some of these ideas have at least got you thinking a little bit about some of the things you do in your courses. And again, I appreciate your time, Cindy, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being with us. That was really interesting. Hopefully we can get your slides and take a look.
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the time.
No, not at all. I was trying to get a lot in. All right, good luck with the rest of the.
All right, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Maria Uage, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, from Udmurt State University in Ijevsk, Russia.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Maria Uage. So thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in our symposium. I'm very glad to be here, and I'd like to share information about my experience of distance learning in Udmurt State University, Ijevsk, during the pandemic. And I'll share my slides. Just a second. Well, I have some problems, I guess. 1 minute. Sorry, some problems with my computer.
No problem. If you want to email them to me, I can probably project them from my end, if that would be easier.
Yes, maybe. Oh, it's okay. Oh,
there you go.
Yes, nice. So I'd like to share information about my experience of distance learning of energy law in our university. That experience relieved a number of problematic issues faced by students and teachers. First, it is the availability of technical means, a computer, a printer, and a fast internet connection at home, as for students and for teachers as well. Another problem was the level of technological equipment of universities, of our university, and preparedness of teachers for online learning. To ensure an adequate level of online education, it is important not only to have technological equipment, but also the skills of teachers to work in the new conditions. Since the transition to distance education occurred in emergency mode, teachers didn't have the opportunity and enough time to prepare for this distance education. The difficulties that arise in the process of distance learning are associated not only with technical and material capabilities, but also with a number of psychological aspects and emotional difficulties. In particular, they occur with those students who don't have a sufficient level of internal motivation and need constant external control, which is currently weakened. Subsequently, this can lead to a significant lag in the curriculum of vulnerable groups of students. The lack of feedback, feedback from students, is one of the most significant disadvantages of online education. Because sometimes they turn their camera off, and I don't know about their opinion on my course. The experience of working during quarantine allowed us to identify the most successful forms of online education. in my point of view. It's first of all, it's lecture in real time with control elements, with video elements, with audio elements. Also, it's study of resources, internet resources, on electronic media, on paper, text with the inclusion of illustrations, with the inclusion of video, with the inclusion of audio, and with the inclusion of animation. Also, it's independent work on the script, for example, search, research, creative, and so on. Next, it's conference in chat, conference in forum, collective project work, individual project work, and training exercises, training using special training systems. Control work, for example, it's testing, answers to control questions, and consultations. Also, I would like to tell you about advantages of distance education during this pandemic period. First of all, it's that students can combine study and work because it's a real problem for them now. Also, the learning process is carried out with the maximum use of modern information technologies, multimedia technologies. Also, it's availability of training materials. All our educational materials are available in electronic form on the portal and on website of our university and each faculty. And one discussion issue is psychological comfort. I guess that for some students, personal contact with the teacher during a test or exam can cause discomfort. So the ability to do everything remotely significantly increases the level of psychological well-being of students. And now I would like to share my experience of distance learning on the example of my course, Energy Law of the Russian Federation and Foreign Countries. The main task of teaching this course is the formation of students' knowledge in the field of energy law, as of the Russian Federation, as of foreign countries, as well as the development of skills in the application of energy legislation by state authorities, local governments, and law enforcement agencies. Traditional methods of teaching and mentoring students' knowledge don't lose their relevance. But at the same time, along with traditional methods, innovation methods are widely introduced into my educational process. I apply active and interactive learning models based on the use of information computer technologies. In the educational process, lectures, conversations, multimedia presentations, also brainstorming, work in small groups, and other modern forms are practiced, taking into account the technical capabilities of our university and, of course, of students. When students have to prepare multimedia presentation, they have a good opportunity to develop independent creative thinking. And I'm also use business games or cases on the most problematic issues of the discipline. So this method allows me to involve all students in the group, since I divide all participants into subgroups. So I give them one issue, but different questions for different subgroups. And students very like these methods. During online education, we can use this form of education in Zoom conference or, for example, in a Skype session or even WhatsApp chat or other network, maybe Facebook or some Russian networks. But also students need access to system with legislation of the Russian Federation and Udmurt Republic, where they can get some legal acts and books, articles, court practice, and so on. Another effective technology is access to the official websites of the state authorities of the Russian Federation and Udmurt Republic. For example, official website of the government of the Russian Federation or government of the Udmurt Republic, or maybe official website of the Ministry of Environmental, and so on. The information provided on these sites may serve as additional material to my lecture on the topic state regulation of energy. Also, with students, we use foreign websites, and we can get some information about foreign experience on energy regulation in different states. And the last issue that I would like to share, how we can control knowledge of students. In my point of view, during this pandemic, testing on particular topic was the most optimal way. That's it. That's all I would like to tell you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, and hopefully we'll have some time to discuss more in the discussion section. Next, we have our first COVID-19 related schedule change. One of our speakers is ill and needed to switch to a different time. So Chris Behan is going to go next, and he is from right here at SIU. Are you in the room?
I am in the room.
Okay.
Yes, I'm just waiting for my camera to turn on. Okay, thank you, Cindy. And I was expecting to go a little bit later, but I'm glad to be able to go now. And it means I can enjoy the rest of the conference without having to worry about what I'm going to say. I'm going to share my screen here for you. And I guess I will turn off my camera. So my topic is teaching universal courtroom advocacy principles across systems and cultures. And in some ways, this is about a personal journey that has led to some insights that I think are going to change the way that I teach in the future. And the article that I plan to write as a result of this symposium and publish has to do with trying to find effective ways to teach advocacy to students from somewhere else, and also to bring colleagues in from other places. So I want to start with some of the challenges that are related to teaching in another culture. And I've got a good friend here at SIU who regularly teaches a comparative law course and has shared with me a term that I really like that I think is helpful in understanding some of the base problems. It's legal chauvinism, which is an inclination to exaggerate the relevance of American law and democratic institutions as a model for other legal cultures. And then another commentator has written that when we are trying to incorporate our own American views of, say, the adversarial trial with the views of other countries, we have to make sure that we can avoid the appearance of being ethnocentric and myopic, traits that are too often attributed to Americans operating in foreign cultures. I would like to say that I have never suffered from legal chauvinism and ethnocentrism, but that would be a lie. And I'm going to share with you a brief story about that. About 7 years ago this month, I had the opportunity to go teach a trial advocacy course in Botswana. It was my first time visiting sub-Saharan Africa. It was my first time teaching a trial advocacy course to lawyers and law students from another country. I had been teaching for the National Institute of Trial Advocacy for about a decade at that point, and I had taught all over the country, and I felt like I was pretty good at what I did, and I was excited to go to Botswana. In fact, I took my now deceased father and my son with me for the trip, and we all had really a wonderful time together. I did some research in preparation for my trip to Botswana, but really not enough. I learned a few things. I learned that Botswana had been a British protectorate up until about 1966. I learned a little bit about the levels of court that they have there with the Kotla customary courts and magistrates court and the high court and of course their court of appeal. I learned a little bit about that, but I also had a lot of assumptions going over there, which was that their system would be very similar to ours because it had been derived from the British common law. And I was prepared to teach a class on opening statements to the group. And I was prepared to do this in the context of NITA, National Institute for Trial Advocacy Training, which views the American jury trial as the best model to teach any advocacy skill. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But as I was flying over on my flight, there was a gentleman sitting across the aisle from me. I struck up a conversation with him, and I found out that he was an advocate from South Africa. And an advocate in South Africa is somebody who actually goes to court and tries cases. They have solicitors and they have advocates. And we talked for a little bit, and he found out I was going to Botswana and told me that he had tried several cases in Botswana. So this gave me the chance to really tailor my presentation to the Botswana audience. And so I asked a remarkably ignorant question of him that a little bit more research would have caused me not to ask. I said, well, can you give me some insights about how you deal with Botswana juries as compared to South African juries? And he looked at me like I had an arm growing out of my head, because neither Botswana nor South Africa has trial by jury. Botswana has never had it, and South Africa only had it for a brief period. So he educated me about that. And I went over to Botswana a little bit chastened, and also trying to figure out how I was going to give my presentation in an environment that I had not expected. That I wasn't going to be able to tie everything into trying a jury trial case in Botswana. And I share that story because I worry sometimes that when we try to have cross-country, cross-cultural collaborations, there is some danger that we can have a myopic view that's formed by our own experiences that could negatively impact the experience that we have with our students. Now, I have to tell you that I had a wonderful experience teaching in Botswana, and I gained a couple of insights that have really changed my life since. First of all, there were only 2 American faculty members among the approximately 10 faculty members teaching. We had faculty from Kenya, we had faculty from Uganda, we had several from Botswana, and we had students from Botswana and Zambia, and we had we even about a third of the class weren't even lawyers. Botswana has police courts with police prosecutors. So we had police officers with a high school education that we were training to try cases alongside lawyers who had been practicing for 15 or 20 years. And one of the things that I learned was to really appreciate the remarkable advocacy skills of my African colleagues. And I found myself thinking several times, I wish I could take this person back to the United States to teach in one of my courses. And because of the expense and the time involved, that wasn't really going to be practical. I was able to go there because of the generous travel support that my law school provided, but it was expensive. It was several $1000s to make that trip. And it's not the sort of thing that I can do every year or even every other year. And I imagine that my colleagues in Africa would face similar issues, and many of them were practicing attorneys who would also have had to give up time in practice. But I really wanted my students to be able to see the different ways of giving examinations, of preparing for trial, of interacting with the court. And at the time, it just didn't seem like it was going to be possible. But that was a real insight that I gained from that. And I had to learn to listen as I was teaching and try to figure out what I could add that would not be a demonstration of legal chauvinism and ethnocentrism, not teaching them how to try an American case, but trying to identify universal principles where I could bring what I knew into a situation that could help them. So some of the challenges that we face beyond legal chauvinism also just have to do with the fact that we are coming from different cultures and systems, and that would apply even if our systems are derived from a common ancestor. So in the world today, we have 2 main types of systems. We have the inquisitorial system, which is by far the most common in the world. And then we have the adversarial system, which was based on the English common law. And then we have a number of hybrid systems, such as we're seeing in international tribunals, where we may have a panel of professional judges that uses adversarial trial procedures, including cross-examination of witnesses and an expanded role for lawyers. These different types of systems and the different cultures that have shaped each of them have real meaning. And they have real meaning because procedures are different, customs are different, methods of persuasion are different. The things that you can do and get away with and that you shouldn't do are going to be different in every culture and system. And one of the things that I find is interesting as I've been doing the research for this presentation is the extent to which the world is starting to merge together a number of different legal procedures. For instance, in the world of criminal law and criminal procedure, a number of countries with the traditional inquisitorial model, which is heavily driven by the judge. Lawyers play a subordinate role. Many countries that have inquisitorial systems are now increasing their lay participation in the system. And some of them have even adopted a form of trial by jury that is not the same as the American or British or Australian version of trial by jury, but nonetheless is a grafting in of an adversarial process or system with an inquisitorial one. Likewise, we can see in American courts that and elsewhere in the world that a number of inquisitorial type procedures are being adopted as well. So we have some convergence of procedures that's taking place. And then when we have the international courts, people may go and participate in a system that is definitely a hybrid of whatever they're used to, plus procedures that may be used in other countries. So I think that it would be important and a challenge that we would all face when we undertake to teach people in other cultures and systems is to make sure we don't assume that simply because we do things a particular way in our country that they are done that same way in another one. There's also an issue that comes up as a real challenge with teaching materials and practice files. And I'll just briefly discuss that. The National Institute for Trial Advocacy model has actually been quite influential worldwide. And there are not a lot of really good teaching materials all over the world on how to teach things such as trial and advocacy skills. So you have to be careful, I think, when you go to another country to teach, if you're an American, to just provide these American teaching materials without some context, without a way to adapt them to local systems. The same applies to practice files. We often use a practice case file to teach, and students can practice different skills with that file. And it's important, I think, to have practice files that are based on local law and that have local facts. And even then, things can go wrong. I taught a course in Tanzania one time, and the file had been written by an American law firm. It was a great file. And there was an evidentiary issue in there that was no big deal to us. There was a form that to all of the American attorneys involved in the teaching had a blank spot on it. And we viewed that as going more to the weight and not the admissibility of the document. And in our work with the Tanzanian attorneys, for them, that was the entire case. Because if that form was filled out improperly in their system, the case was over. And we viewed it as not even a roadblock, they viewed it as case dispositive. And that affected the way that we were able to teach case analysis and other skills. So one of the insights that I've had is that if we are going to be able to work together, first of all, the lament that I had when I was first in Botswana about the distance and the expense is really not true anymore. Because of technology such as Zoom and other systems that are available to us, Google Meet and even Skype, we're able to bridge gaps. We can bring people together. And I've actually experimented with this. I've brought my friends from Kenya and Uganda and Botswana and Australia into my American classes where they have been able to give real-time critiques of my students, just as if they were in the classroom. So there's a lot of gap bridging that can go on with technology, and it creates new opportunities for us. But one of the things we need to look at to avoid this issue of chauvinism is we need to find universal courtroom advocacy principles that are going to fit in any system. I've identified a few of them here and in my abstract. But I believe that if we are to focus on these basic skills, I could bring somebody in from an inquisitorial system and they could help me teach my class if we focused on the things that good lawyers do in any system. And those include preparation, investigation of a case, analyzing the facts of a case in light of the governing law, organizing an effective presentation, basic public speaking skills. We can get people to stand up on their feet and formulate a question and make a statement. To the extent that witness presentation is integrated by the attorney as part of their procedure, to be able to ask simple questions so that a witness can give the right answers and have an organized presentation. And then finally, considering issues of persuasion and oral advocacy outside the context of the American jury trial. I should let you know, by the way, that this is an issue not only teaching overseas, but actually in American courtrooms. I have many times taught in a NETA course where somebody has raised their hand and said, in my practice area, I will never try a case by jury. you know, at our office, everything that we do is in front of a judge alone, and we are not allowed to do X, Y, Z, whatever the things are that we just taught them. And that has caused me to think about, you know, the idea of using training people to try an American jury trial as the Cadillac, as the you know, the gold standard, I would say, for teaching other people how to try a case. I think that it would be better instead to focus on identifying these universal procedures, and maybe leaving training for the jury trial itself to advanced courses or courses that are limited to those who would actually be trying those cases. So I see that my time is nearly up here, but I just wanted to share with you that I believe that as a result of COVID and the things that we've discovered about how we can use technology to help each other, there is a world of opportunities that is open for skills training across cultures, across systems. I think that it benefits our students when we can bring people in from other cultures. And I think that it benefits them if our colleagues come in with an idea of how they can help us improve in the areas that are common to all lawyers. And that is what I intend to explore more thoroughly in my symposium piece. And I really appreciate the opportunity that I've had to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Our next speaker is Christina Shishkira. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Good morning, I'm Christina Shishkina.
No, I didn't.
I understand
Thank
it's
you.
difficult to pronounce my surname. And first of all, I am grateful to the organizers for this opportunity to take part in the symposium and to share my experience in educational process in Udmurt State University in pandemic period. The pandemic started in 2020 was a great challenge for higher education. The main goal of education in Russia has been recognizing the learning process, preserving the quality of education. All changes in educational activities occurred in the two stages. The first one, I named it the initial period. It started in April and finished in June 2020. This period is associated with the onset of pandemic and fast transition without due preparation, total online learning. Most of the professors spontaneously try to organize the educational process in extreme circumstances. But I should tell that some of lectures were more succeeding at. Group of university professors used the experience and knowledge gained during the educational process before the pandemic. For instance, distant techniques were used for some groups of students, including the electronic educational system. They had an individual experience in using e-learning programs with allowed to organize learning process in proper level. However, only few of us had such experience. The second group of professors were ready for a minimal change in the educational process. So a few months before the pandemic, professors of the law faculty of Udmurt State University were trained to work with an electronic system. However, they had no real experience with the system. For that reason, there was neither a systematic approach nor a single training methodology. All this had led to an attempt to organize the work of students using self-training at maximum. Under these conditions, this decision was partly correctly, but led prevent failure in the educational process. And at the same time, it led to fatigue of students and difficulties in material, in mastering the material. The second stage. This stage started in September 2020 and goes on. It characterized by the stabilization of educational approaches and adaptation and transforming of experience. The main tasks of phase are to increase the use of online educational resources, to combine conventional methods with online techniques to keep high level of education. Now, I would like to tell a few words about used methods. Firstly, use e-learning program includes e-textbooks, simulators, online workshop for students, test system, e-libraries, and so on. I should say that most of them were completely exceeded in Russia during the pandemic. This approach, used for self-training of students on certain topics and for successful complementation of assignments and tests. For instance, the system Uage became one of the educational platforms which opened access to legal literature for free. Secondly, an electronic database in jurisprudence. The legal systems such as Consultant Plus, Guarant Code are traditionally used for education and practical purpose. However, during the pandemic, their role has increased greatly. And thirdly, messengers, teleconferences, local and regional communication networks, data exchange networks, and other have become the main one in teaching law in Udmurt State University. Thanks to it, we managed to keep the high level of lecturing during the hectic time. However, conventional lectures have to have a new form. In particular, the maximum use of presentation, interactive smart books, and teaching methodology. At the same time, it should be noted the rejection of a large number of innovation methods, because most of them require the personal presence of students and teachers in the classrooms. I should also mention the transition to the implementation and control of tasks via telecommunication. For these purposes, we use social networks such as Fountaine. At Udmurt State University, a long time ago, the electronic system was introduced and is actively used now. The system includes the possibility of introducing e-courses, testing, assign points for tasks, and ability to advise students online and offline. It also allowed to organize student self-control and assimilation of material. All the mentioned ways of teaching have also been tested for the scientific works of students. Student conference that is taking place annually at the Faculty of Law usually is offline, but for the first time, scientific reports and dialogue for their discussion were arranged for using telecommunication system. And I should say that it received positive feedback from students and university professors. In conclusion, to be in frame of my time, I should notice that despite the unfavorable situation, my colleagues and I could restructure educational process without lowering the quality of education. And the pandemic situation has changed in Russia now. Most of the students study offline, but the experience gained through the pandemic situation was invaluable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. This brings us to our first break and discussion session. So we could have a discussion for about 10 minutes and then we'll take a short break. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask? Maybe we could try bringing up our cameras for this portion of our session. There we go. It's great to see all your faces. I saw a post on a Twitter, a tweet yesterday that said online conferences are never as good as in-face conferences, and there are some reasons to think that that's true, but I don't know. There's also some good things that can come out of these online conferences because we get to bring in people from all over the world, which is very difficult to do if we're having an in-person conference. Well, let me just pose a question and maybe get us started, and then I hope that others of you will come up with questions as we go along. So this relates to something that I think Maria brought up a little bit in her presentation, and that is what happens when we suddenly have to go to online teaching and our students don't have the equipment or the space or the ability to get online and do the things that we're asking them to do. How have you responded to that need on the part of the students?
Actually, it's a real big problem because some students live in village and even they have a bad internet connection. So it was a real big problem for me, and not only for me, but for some students. So I don't know what to do in this situation.
Has anybody come up with solutions for this problem?
Well, I'm Amy Ramston, and I teach at a community college in either the first or the poorest congressional district in the country. So can you imagine what we had, right? And we came up with solutions because we had to teach online. We gave out laptops to all of our students. We gave hotspots to our students. Um, we're very low. Our enrollment has really gone down tremendously, but we as professors, and we can do this because we're a community college. Law school, I think it's very different. I'm an attorney also, so I know. We are doing things differently in how we teach because we can't have the same expectations. It's not that we're lowering our expectations, it's that we're doing things a lot differently. So I think that you really have to take it into consideration both with the technological and with the pedagogical.
Susan?
Yeah, I noticed a different kind of problem. Of course, you have the technological problem, but many of my law students, I'm Susan Bissam-Rapp, and I teach in San Diego, California at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, but I also taught at a different law school in the fall and also taught an online course to Italian PhD students in the fall. A lot of my students had responsibilities for children, pets, construction going on in their apartments and homes. And what I did was to implement policies of flexibility. Generally, I wanted all my students to have their cameras on if they had the technological capability, because I needed to be able to gauge their reactions to the material as best I could. I taught a 97-person course in the fall and a 20-person course also in the fall. And I just needed to see people. But at the same time, people brought babies and toddlers on camera. I had people's cats and dogs. I had people say somebody is in the kitchen unplugging a drain that's clogged up, and we just rolled with it. We just rolled with it as best we could. And I found it was interesting that Dan is talking about chunking up the segments of a class session. Sometimes those helped provide humorous interludes, which actually helped pedagogically. So I think flexibility for me was the watchword, and it wasn't just technological problems, it was all the problems of balancing many aspects of their lives at one time.
You heard my dogs earlier this morning, so I can definitely relate to that comment. And your comments made me think of another aspect of how this has affected our students, and that is that I know many of you went to open book online exams. We went to open book online exams. And what I saw from my students, many of whom are in the room, so I don't know if I should be talking about you while you're in the room, but was a much better performance on the exams. And I don't know if I attribute that to less anxiety, less nervousness about grades or that kind of thing. Maria mentioned in her remarks that students get more nervous when the professor is present. So maybe being at a remote location helped with that. But the other thing that I worry about on the flip side of that is that open book exams don't require memorization, and bar exams do require memorization. So I have lately been thinking about how to ensure that memorization takes place. So I'll just stop talking and see if anyone has any reactions to that. James?
I was just agreeing. I think that's a concern of mine also, that maybe we may be handicapping ourselves for the bar exam. I'm a little afraid about it, but I do my best to try to employ the same study habits and testing techniques that I would in an in-person exam, but it is a concern of mine for sure.
Does anybody else have any? Yeah, Bill.
I was, I'm at St. Louis University School of Law. It's really been a fascinating conversation so far today. Thanks so much for organizing it. I was teaching international business transactions when COVID erupted. And like many law schools, we made the decision to switch to pass-fail rather than a letter grade. And I was struck by the extraordinarily high level of the quality of the exams, despite the pass-fail grading model. It didn't drop at all. If anything, arguably, it might have actually increased a bit. Maybe upon further reflection, I shouldn't be surprised by that. But I think it is something that was noteworthy. We switched back to a letter grade model in the fall, in part because students expect that, employers expect it, and so on. But my hope is that we really reflect on what we've learned from this pandemic experience in terms of equity, in terms of innovation, in terms of what's effective and what isn't, and try to draw upon those experiences. That's one small example of something that I observed in the classroom in the spring.
This is Amy again. William, that is phenomenal, because that's exactly how I feel. I have changed a lot of the way that I give my tests. Now, my students are probably not happy that I'm a lawyer, so I give all my exams in fact pattern based. But that's just the way I think. And so I'm able to have them, let's say they can't really be rifling through something because they have a certain limited amount of time for the exam to really, so in a sense they kind of have to memorize it in order to then apply it to a situation, which also helps a lot with cheating, because my students, there's a lot of that, unfortunately, in the community college level. And so I have to really, I give different exams. I give 3 different ones. I mean, if I have to, but I also, they're now together a lot, and they exchange numbers and things. So, I have to really watch that. But I really change the way that I'm doing everything, and I also have them do more projects together, because the big thing for me is exactly what Susan was saying, like you don't even know if they, or somebody was saying, if you have the video on or the video off. And my kids too are bringing their babies and they're everybody, you know what I mean, because my kids have babies or taking care of their parents. And so I have them doing projects together, and that has been the most wonderful thing for me. So instead of lecturing to them, they do all these things together, and it's been much better. And I have to give up some control, which I don't like, but it's been much better, I think.
Anybody else have thoughts?
Now, I wanted to follow up on something that Susan said, and also something that Bill said. Bill talked a lot about or mentioned, equity and being more sensitive to that. And one of the things that has really been stunning to me is, as one of our speakers mentioned, about people being in villages and maybe not having such good internet. The geographic footprint that a lot of our students are in, they've got terrible internet. I have terrible internet at home. I have been kicked out of my own class before, and that's tough. So one of the things that I've done some reading about this, about whether it's equitable to insist that students remain on camera in distance learning classes or not. Are we a student who might be in a really rough or embarrassing living situation? Are we exposing that person to ridicule or shame, if they have to show up on camera? What happens if they don't have very good internet? And if we put them on camera, they're going to regularly get kicked out of the class. So I've really struggled with that. I've taken an opposite approach from Susan. I ask them to keep their cameras off unless I've called on them, unless they're participating in class, and then they turn them on. And I found that, at least for some of the bandwidth issues that we tend to have, that helps in class, but it does create an additional problem of, I think, internet ghosting. There have been times when I've called on a student who appears to be present because their name is in a box, and then they never respond. I've concluded that they've disappeared. And so I've really wrestled with those issues because I want the engagement that Susan's talking about, but I also want to be fair to the students in the way that Bill's talking about. And I think this is a tremendous challenge that we have to deal with in ways we haven't had to before. And then it's made me think, when the students return in the fall, they're still going to have the same life situations and difficulties that they were having in COVID. It's just that they won't be at home. And I will be probably more aware of that than I have been in the past. But I'm kind of curious, about this issue of cameras on, cameras off. How many of us feel like it's important to have them on? How many feel like they should stay off? I don't know that there's a right answer. I'm just intrigued.
I mean, I would say that my cameras on policy is an expectation that I'm very flexible with. One of the things that happened over the last year where students got sick, I had students with COVID. I had students who needed oral surgery. And so, the expectation was you need to be there, you need to be present. In a really large class, I also use my teaching assistants to help monitor who was there and who was not. When the camera went off, I could sometimes check on people after class. I noticed you turned your camera off. Is everything okay? So it wasn't like any points were deducted or anything. It was more of an expectation that was flexibly administered because I realized that there were so many different circumstances that students were encountering. So I really wanted them there because I think it's easy to tune out otherwise, but certainly I wasn't rigid about it. I think you need to be flexible.
Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting conversation. And what was interesting for us is I taught a first year class. We hadn't met the students who were admitted and that come to the university. I haven't met them. And so not having their cameras on, you're speaking to people you have never met. And so we had an arrangement and, alive to all these circumstances, we agreed that they would have a day when you're supposed to have your camera on. And so you would make all arrangements to make sure that on that day, at least you can have your camera on. So that way, at least I got to see them. And we've also done an interesting research together with the University of Sierra Leone and Carleton University in Canada, a joint research where we sent out Google Forms to students just to talk about their circumstances. And it's really challenging for many of them. I mean, the reasons that you're talking about are the same challenges that they talked about. But interestingly, some of them just said about the time that when you're at home, there are expectations to do house chores. And so that limits the amount of time that they would put in for studying and many other reasons.
James?
So I don't know, I may get some pushback or some flack from my fellow classmates on this comment, but I think that at the base level, a cameras on policy increases accountability in the classroom setting. However, and I will say that there are other methods that I've seen professors incorporate that have kind of, mitigated those problems. Like for Professor Upchurch, for example, she has like a series of online quizzes that we take during class, and Professor Behan uses some of the online polling tactics also. I think those kind of helps you stay engaged in the conversation during class, and it also raises your awareness that, okay, I have to actually participate instead of kind of leaning back in my chair and possibly falling asleep. So I think that's been helpful for me because I have attention sometimes. Sometimes I drift, but that's been really helpful for me. So I just wanted to note that.
I'm muted, sorry. That's another danger of this endeavor. I suggest we take a break for about 5 minutes. And Elena, did you have a question before? Okay.
No.
Okay. I was going to suggest we take about a 5-minute break and then come back for our next set of presentations. So I'll see you back here in about 5 minutes at 10:15 our time.
Cynthia, I'm confused about the timing.
Yes.
I was
You are.
supposed to go at 10:45, I thought. At 11:45, but it's already past that, right?
No, it's not past that. It's right now, it is 10, it is about 10 after 10. So you're next.
Oh, I am? Okay.
Yes, and that's 10:15 here.
10.
I don't know.
Cindy, I think that's not right. She's scheduled for 11:45.
11:45.
Okay, then I have the wrong schedule. Let me,
Well, wait, I'm looking at the one online. Maybe you've changed it since it.
no, the one online says 10:15 for Elena, Ekaterina, and
No, that's me.
Oh yeah, no, but Amy said
Amy.
Amy goes at 11:45 Central Time,
yes.
So what?
which would be 12:45 Eastern Time, right, Amy? Are you?
I was doing it the other way around. Okay, thank you. See? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this time
No, sorry, I was doing it the other way around.
time has been a challenge. Okay, so Elena is at 10:15 and Amy is at 11:45.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
that's all right. See you all in a